The question of human purpose takes on a striking urgency when considering humanity's potential futures. One perspective, explored in Sigal Samuel's piece, The People Who Actually Want AI to Replace Humanity, delves into a philosophical vision where our species might willingly cede its place to a superior artificial intelligence. This radical proposition imagines a self-transcendence, a deliberate step away from biological existence. Juxtaposed against this is the immediate, tangible struggle for human survival and progress, as seen in Jonathan Cohn's The Cancer Research Machine Trump is Gutting just delivered a big breakthrough. This piece illuminates the relentless human effort against disease and the political forces that threaten such vital scientific advancements. What emerges from this pairing is a profound contrast, a speculative leap beyond humanity versus the enduring ground-level fight to sustain and improve human life as we know it. Sigal Samuel explores the philosophical argument that humanity should be replaced by a superior AI. This piece delves into the growing subculture of AI successionists who believe artificial intelligence is our rightful heir. As the writer navigates this challenging perspective, notice how she introduces a profound philosophical question: more valuable to whom? This query grounds the debate not in technical feasibility, but in the very nature of value itself, challenging the premise that humanity's replacement could be universally better.
"I want AI to be a tool that allows human flourishing," exclaimed Brad Carson, a former member of Congress. "There is an option out there where AI is just a tool for us. The people who actually want AI to replace humanity. We need to create a new humanism before the AI successionists win." This is a normal thing to say in most circles. But Carson was speaking at an invite-only symposium dedicated to the idea of creating a worthy successor, an AI so impressive, so beyond the mere human, that we'd actually want it to replace humanity. "You're a brave man for entering this room," Dan Fagella, an AI market researcher and organizer of the symposium, told Carson. "You're in probably the only room in the country where most people disagree with you." The attendees at the symposium, which took place at the New York Academy of Sciences last September, are part of a subculture that is growing in importance, the AI successionists, who think that artificial intelligence is our rightful heir, the next step in cosmic evolution. Since they believe AIs could become our moral superiors, they argue it's actually wrong to try to keep the machines down, or even to align them with human values, as most AI companies aim to do. Instead, we should usher in artificial intelligence as a successor to humanity and hand over the world to it, even if that means we go extinct. They know this view is taboo, which is why I was invited only on the condition that I wouldn't quote anyone other than keynote speakers by name. But suffice it to say that this is not a fringe view. It's becoming highly influential. People from major AI labs, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, xAI, were in attendance. So were people from think tanks that directly shape the US government's AI policy. Why I wrote this story. I grew up hearing an old Jewish teaching. Each of us should carry 2 slips of paper, one in each pocket. One says, "I am but dust and ashes," but the other says, "The world was created for me." Reporting on AI these past few years, I've watched more and more people forget the second message. They think we should be okay with getting obliterated if a more valuable species can take our place. But valuable to whom? Value isn't dispensed from some cosmic vantage point. It's always value to someone, and we're valuable to us. And yet the AI successionists are right about something. We can't expect human beings to look the same 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now.
So how do we decide which kinds of technological change to embrace and which to refuse? It bothered me that classical humanism doesn't have a good answer. Here I have sketched what a new one might look like. AI successionism has been gaining ground among technologists over the past decade. In 2015, Google co-founder Larry Page famously accused Elon Musk of speciesism because Page thought we should let digital minds take over, and Musk disagreed. The successionist vision has been amplified by the advent of effective accelerationism, EACC, in 2022. Its founder, Guillaume Verdon, the physicist more colorfully known on X as Based Bef Jezos, describes EACC as a meta-religion that's about having faith in the universe's drive toward increasingly intelligent systems. The best thing we can do is help the universe by developing advanced AI as fast as possible, even at the expense of humanity. EACC, as Verdon has written, has no particular allegiance to the biological substrate. Tech heavyweights have come on board. Venture capitalist Mark Andreessen listed EACC thinkers as his patron saints. Gary Tan, the CEO of tech startup accelerator Y Combinator, included EACC in his social media bio and invested in Verdon's company, which aims to build the world's most efficient computers. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman posted on X to Verdon saying, "You cannot out-accelerate me." And these days, AI successionism is spreading beyond Silicon Valley. At the New York Symposium, Fagella told the audience that trying to preserve the human species as it is would be silly. We could ask the questions that would tie all of our moral aspirations eternally to 23 chromosomes, or we could ask the cosmic questions, Fagella said. He wanted us to consider unpolite, uncouth possibilities, starting with the flame of consciousness, the capacity for experience and moral value, may be the rarest and most precious thing in the universe. Humanity is currently a torch carrying that flame, but what if we're ultimately not the best carrier for it? And if AI can spread that flame far further than we mere humans can, generating experiences of bliss and forms of moral value that we could never even dream of, shouldn't we let it? Fagella's talk was greeted by a loud round of applause. Later, he and a couple dozen attendees headed to a nearby hotel balcony for drinks.
And so it was that I found myself overlooking the Manhattan skyline as people talked about the end of humanity over cocktails. There was some diversity of opinion among the group. Not everyone self-identified with the relatively new term AI successionist. Some were proponents of transhumanism, the movement that says we should use tech to proactively evolve our species into Homo sapiens 2.0. Transhumanists hope to keep some version of humanity going, but definitely not the current hardware. They dream of radical life extension, cognitive enhancement, and eventually mind uploading. Musk, who said he created his brainchip company Neuralink to help humanity merge with AI, probably falls, or at least fell, into this category. Others were posthumanists, those who want us to give rise to descendants that move beyond humanity altogether. The biologist sitting across from me was very excited about the prospect of merging humans with AI. He said we should task AI with figuring out how best to do the merger, then take it off the leash and allow AI to control its own evolution, and by extension, ours. Of course, he said, not all humans will make it through the transformation. Only a select group of people will transition to the next evolutionary stage. Presumably the type of people privileged enough to imbibe cocktails at Manhattan AI Symposia. The man seated beside me, a researcher from one of the major AI companies, was even more radical. Forget merger. It's okay if humans don't survive at all, he said. Human text has been used to train the AIs. In some sense, then, the human spirit will live on. So, on the cosmic level, he said cheerfully, I'm okay with it. Most people are definitely not okay with it. The average person would probably find the answers of the worthy successor group repugnant, yet the core question they pose cannot be ignored. Whether they picture us merging with machines or ultimately being superseded by them, technologists are developing innovations that could dramatically change what it means to be human. Think AI-powered brain chips that enable mind reading, or magnetic implants that give you a sixth sense, and genetic tools that could even reshape the DNA of all future generations. As it becomes possible to direct our own evolution as a species, and potentially even create a new species that surpasses us, we have to decide, how do we know to what extent it does make sense to transform ourselves using technology?
What kinds of augmentation do we want, and what kinds do we absolutely not want? What do we wish, ultimately, to become? This is a moral question, even a spiritual one, and it demands a spiritual response. The AI successionists are offering one. For anyone who finds it repulsive, the challenge is to offer a countervailing positive vision. And it's essential to do that now, because as sci-fi as the successionists might sound, they are building real political power, with links to the authoritarian right. Several of the tech heavyweights who've embraced successionism want to escape the control of democratic governments, so much so that they're seeking to create their own sovereign colonies. That can come in the form of space colonies, a la Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, or in independent startup cities or network states built by corporations here on Earth, currently Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen's favorite approach. And Verdon's investors include entrepreneur Balaji Srinivasan, a major proponent of the network state. These broligarchs have successfully cozied up to the Trump administration, clearing the way for their accelerationist vision. And they'll take the wheel unless we come up with an alternate vision for the future. The natural alternative is humanism, which replaced the medieval view that humans need God to rescue them with the view that humans have the ability and responsibility to achieve flourishing through their own efforts. The problem is that so far we haven't developed a version of humanism that's brave enough to directly tackle the core question, what do we want our species to become, and answer it compellingly. The most common pro-human response tries to say there are certain fixed traits that make humans unique, and to locate value only in humans as they currently exist. In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human, Pope Leo recently wrote in his encyclical Magnifica Humanitas. This response says, let's use tech remedially to alleviate problems like disease, but let's not try to augment the species. That feels insufficient as a guide to the future, because even before the advent of AI and gene editing, human has never been a static category. Homo sapiens has always been evolving and augmenting itself, from the agricultural diet that reshaped our jaws to the algorithms reshaping our attention.
The old formulation is the naive formulation of humanism. Shannon Valor, a philosopher of technology at the University of Edinburgh, told me recently. It's the idea that there's this blueprint for what a human is, and that somehow technology, or any things that change us, take us away from that blueprint, when in fact we've been changing ourselves with language, with tools, with architecture, with culture, from the moment we climbed down from the trees. A 21st century humanism needs to say something more sophisticated than just keep humanity the same. It needs to have an answer to the question of what we want humanity to become in a tech-augmented world. But if there is a better vision for our technological future than the one offered by AI successionism, what is it? AI successionism is a religion, but it's wearing a secular disguise. Maybe you think it sounds weird to say the AI successionists, a bunch of scientists, technologists, and venture capitalists, are offering a spiritual vision, but their ideas are spiritual in the extreme. And to understand why their movement has gained momentum, we need to understand its deeply religious origins and how it morphed into a supposedly secular worldview. And that means going back. You probably remember that in the Bible's book of Genesis, Adam eats some forbidden fruit, and humanity suffers a fall from grace. But did you know that in the Middle Ages, Christian thinkers began to believe that the way to restore humanity to its original perfection was to use technology? These thinkers argue that part of what it meant for Adam to be formed in God's image was that he was also a creator, a maker. So if we wanted to truly return to the godlike perfection of Adam prior to his fall, we'd have to lean into that creator aspect of ourselves. This idea took off in medieval monasteries. Even in the midst of the so-called Dark Ages, some of these institutions became hotbeds of engineering, producing inventions like the first known tidal-powered water wheel and impact-drilled well. For many Christians, tech progress became synonymous with moral progress. By the Renaissance, some Christian thinkers were insisting that we should progress not just by designing new and innovative objects, but by redesigning ourselves too. In 1486, philosopher Giovanni Pico della Mirandola argued that what's unique about us humans is not some static trait, but the very freedom of will that allows us to change into whatever we might want.
In his oration on the dignity of man, he imagined God telling humankind, "We have made you a creature neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that with freedom of choice and with honor, you may, as the free and proud shaper of your own being, fashion yourself in the form you may prefer." Pico believed that we could use spiritual technologies like magic to transform our nature, and he argued that we have the choice to become either like the animals or like the angels. It will be in your power to descend to the lower brutish forms of life. You will be able, through your own decision, to rise again to the superior orders whose life is divine. As the dominance of religion waned over the next couple of centuries, Enlightenment thinkers took Pico's embrace of human plasticity and secularized it. They replaced the concept of divine ascent with one of indefinite progress. They insisted on the perfectibility of the human, and they fetishized rational intelligence as the means of achieving that optimal state. Would it be absurd now to suppose, wrote 18th-century philosopher Marquis de Condorcet, that the improvement of the human race should be regarded as capable of unlimited progress? Of course, some European thinkers hung on to their Christianity too, and they found ways to fuse it with the rational humanism of the Enlightenment. It's a trend that continued into the 1900s, with proponents of Russian cosmism, an intellectual movement that wanted to achieve literal resurrection of the dead through science, and French Jesuit paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who argued that we could use tech to nudge along human evolution and thereby bring about the kingdom of God. As author Megan O'Giblin explains in her fantastic book God, Human, Animal, Machine, Teilhard believed that melding humans and machines would lead to a state of superconsciousness, whereby we become a new enlightened species. He influenced his pal Julian Huxley, the evolutionary biologist who was president of both the British Humanist Association and the British Eugenics Society, and who popularized the term transhumanism. Huxley inspired the contemporary futurist Ray Kurzweil, who predicted in the 1990s that we were approaching a time when human intelligence could merge with machine intelligence, becoming unbelievably powerful.
The human species, along with the computational technology it created, will be able to solve age-old problems, and will be in a position to change the nature of mortality in a post-biological future, Kurzweil wrote. And he, in turn, has influenced Silicon Valley heavyweights like Musk, who explicitly aims at merging human and machine intelligence. But there's a big problem for these latter-day technologists. While we've never had more power to direct the evolution of our species through tech, it's also never been less obvious what we should evolve toward. For good old Pico back in the Renaissance, human self-transformation had a clear end, spiritual union with the divine. There was a hierarchy running from animals to humans to angels to God, and the direction you were supposed to travel in was clear, up. But for us postmoderns, the universe does not come inscribed with directions. Should we evolve ourselves toward greater intelligence, or longevity, or creativity, or kindness, or power? If intelligence, which kind of intelligence? If power, should we wield it to simply steward our home planet or to conquer the stars? Should we be maximally humble or maximally ambitious? The cosmos is silent as to what to do. The assumptions baked into AI successionism, the first thing that unites all the AI successionists is that they refuse to accept that silence. Hungry for instruction, they insist that it's out there and that they can see it written into the very nature of the universe. In other words, they believe that the universe has a telos, a particular end or goal. Teleological thinking has been popular since antiquities because it's comforting for us humans. If the universe has a goal, then maybe we can discover it, and then we'll know just what to do. As Fagella writes, this does give humanity a direction. Whether the AI successionists realize it or not, they are smuggling teleology back into modernity under the guise of science and tech. And that brings us to the second thing that unites them. They want to follow these supposed cosmic instructions so they can help the universe achieve its ultimate destiny. For many, that means helping the universe wake up. Perceiving the cosmos as barren, they want to spread consciousness everywhere so that the universe can fill up with conscious experience, of bliss, of goodness, of the fact of its own existence.
If we can venture out and animate the countless worlds above with life and love and thought, then we could bring our cosmos to its full scale, make it worthy of our awe, writes Toby Ord, a former research fellow at Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute, which was long the world's leading center for transhumanist thought. Personally, I think the cosmos is already worthy of my awe, and I find it presumptuous to believe that the universe is almost entirely asleep, and that it needs us humans to animate or wake it up. But as the writer Adam Kirsch documents in The Revolt Against Humanity, It's common to hear in these circles that one way of achieving that awakening is to colonize the universe and transform all its matter and energy into computonium, a term for any substance that can compute information. By turning the entire universe into a humongous data center, we'd be making it into a godlike mind. Even the dumb matter and mechanisms of the universe will be transformed into exquisitely sublime forms of intelligence, Kurzweil writes. Becoming one giant mind, he says, is the ultimate destiny of the universe. Verdun, the founder of EACC, finds his ultimate destiny written in the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy. The universe, it says, is gradually running down. Concentrated pockets of energy disperse over time until none remains useful. Building on a contested theory of life's origin, Verdun argues that intelligent life is selected for precisely because it accelerates entropy. Smarter agents can find and exploit energy stocks that less intelligent ones can't. Think predators tracking prey, or humans drilling for oil, burning through them faster. A superhuman AI expanding across the cosmos would be better at this than humans. So Verdun says, we should follow the will of the universe by leaning into the thermodynamic bias. The idea that we should serve at the pleasure of entropy is deeply unintuitive. In fact, philosophers have argued just the opposite, that our task is to resist it.
But to make his case that we shouldn't be scared of being superseded by smarter civilizations that produce more entropy, Verdun uses hierarchical language that echoes Pico's oration. If every species in our evolutionary tree was scared of evolutionary forks from itself, our higher form of intelligence and civilization as we know it would never have emerged. Fagella, the founder of the Worthy Successor Group, makes the same rhetorical move. Humans have access to higher goods than horseshoe crabs. AGI will have access to higher goods than humans, he writes. What a tragedy it would be if that trajectory of uncovering value and possibility were stopped. Likewise, the computer scientist and AI successionist Richard Sutton argues that if you look at things from the point of view of the universe, a classic utilitarian slogan, there's a clear upward trajectory. The cosmos has gone from the mindless age of particles and age of stars all the way to today's age of design, when minded creatures can decide what to make. Although lots of creatures make tools, Sutton says what makes humans unique is that we've taken design to vastly greater heights. According to Sutton, by looking at what makes us unique, we can determine our role in the universe. Since we're designers par excellence, our role is to push design to the extreme. Taking design to the limit means designing beings that are themselves capable of designing. This is what we are doing with AI. This argument is what sets Sutton, like many others, to make a claim about technological inevitability. The suggestion is that we're just identifying what nature has already chosen for us and speeding it along, evolution maxing, if you will. In the ascent of humanity, he says, succession to AI is inevitable. But when we sum up all these ideas, you can see how many shaky assumptions are operating just beneath the surface. There is an objective telos to the universe. We can determine what it is by looking from the point of view of the universe. We should expect that higher beings will be capable of accessing higher goods in a hierarchical universe, and these will better serve the universe's ultimate destiny. We can determine our role in that destiny by looking at what makes us unique. The thing that makes us unique should determine our action. We should maximize the action, that is, do the extreme to the limit version of it.
Some of these assumptions are so old that it's hard to see how weird they are, but they are all worth questioning. I would reject each and every one of those claims, Valor told me. Take the fourth one, for example. The idea that humanity has some particular role, and that the way to pinpoint it is to look for what makes us different from other species, goes all the way back to Aristotle. Living is shared in even by plants, but we are looking for something peculiarly human, wrote the ancient Greek philosopher, ultimately concluding that the human work is the activity of the soul in accord with reason. But there's nothing obvious about that. It would be just as reasonable to say that the proper functioning of humanity requires emphasizing what we share with all other animals. After all, our capacity to feel pleasure and pain, our intelligence, our tool use, our adaptiveness, our ability to form complex social arrangements, none of that is unique to the human animal. There are other leaps in logic hidden in this set of assumptions. For example, even if the universe tends toward a particular destiny, and even if humanity has a special trait that could help it along in that direction,
it does not follow that we have a duty to do that. Philosophers like to describe this fallacy as leaping from is, the world is a certain way, to ought, we must act a certain way. Humans are biological organisms, and the fundamental fact all such life forms share is that we have a hardwired drive to survive. We do not have a moral responsibility to ignore that hardwired drive and let ourselves go extinct in order to help higher forms colonize the universe, any more than our evolutionary ancestors had a duty to make room for us. Unfortunately, as humanism proceeded through the centuries, it absorbed some dubious Enlightenment-era ideas that have made it easy for people to get snowed into believing we do have such a duty. That's right. Humanism, the philosophy that was supposed to be about the value of humans, has actually ended up undermining it in key ways. To chart a better path forward, we need a new humanism, one that's actually fit for the 21st century. Notes towards a new humanism. To start, we need to pick out the flies in the ointment of the old humanism, especially those it picked up as it passed from the Renaissance into the rational humanism of the Enlightenment.
Those flies include the teleological story about the universe, the perfectibility of the human, the hierarchical view that places humans above all other animals, and the idea that we should try to maximize some objective good through rationality. Let's start with the teleology. Although it's appealing to try to spot instructions written into the fabric of the cosmos, expecting the universe to come with prefab values ultimately means shirking our own responsibility. As the existentialist philosophers taught us, nature doesn't choose our meaning for us. That's something we have to make ourselves through our own choices. Key updates to the old humanism. It's time to swap out teleological thinking for a simple admission. We don't know the universe's ultimate destiny, so we should keep a plurality of lifestyles possible. Efforts to perfect the human are dangerous because they contract the range of lifestyles it's okay to live. We should adopt tech that expands that range. Instead of setting up a hierarchy among different species, we can embrace the diverse intelligences view. We don't need to try to look from the perspective of the universe. It is totally appropriate to look from the perspective of humans, while acknowledging that we are one out of many species that matter. Accepting that we have the responsibility to decide what the future looks like means accepting a heavy existential burden, and that takes a ton of courage. It's so much easier to believe that the script is fixed and final and inevitable, but I think that's an example of what French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, denying our own radical freedom in order to escape the anguish of responsibility. Of course, saying that we have the responsibility to decide how we do and don't want humanity to evolve opens up a problem. Who exactly gets to choose? It's tempting for each of us to rush in with the values we want to promote. But if we acknowledge that we don't know the universe's ultimate destiny, or that it's radically indeterminate, then it makes much more sense to not impose one positive vision on everybody. Instead, we need a positive vision that remains truly open and pluralistic. So rather than trying to enforce specific values, one of the best things we can do is refuse to foreclose the possibility for a variety of different lifestyles to persist and thrive.
That means, first of all, taking care not to unduly constrain the liberty of the human beings who already live on this planet. AI successionists often dream of radical interventions, like a brain-computer interface that would give you superhuman intelligence, memory, and mind-reading abilities, or a genetic technology that would create superbabies. They insist they should be allowed to change their bodies however they want. And it's true that self-determination is a precious right. But the AI successionists often fail to consider the other side of this, that everyone else should also have a right to self-determination, meaning they need to be free from implicit coercion. If more and more of us dramatically alter our biology, we may create a society in which everyone feels pressure to do the same, even if they don't want to. To reject alterations would mean to exist at a huge economic disadvantage, or to face moral condemnation for remaining suboptimal when optimization is possible. Even John Stuart Mill, the 19th century English philosopher who literally wrote the book on liberty, didn't think that anyone's right to self-determination is an absolute right. Instead, it's a qualified right,
the kind that we generally honor, but that can be restricted to protect the interests of others. So ultimately, we'll have to strike a reasonable balance between self-determination for the enhancement enthusiasts and protecting the rights of others to live as they choose. Some enhancements may be fine, like implanting a chip in your hand that unlocks your front door. Others may need regulation or restriction, especially if they'd alter the germline for all future generations. One way to think about this is to note that there's a difference between using tech to expand human capabilities and using it in ways that will contract the range of human lives we think it's legitimate to live. That brings us to another one of those flies in the ointment, the idea that the human is something that must be optimized and perfected. That idea, which mandates that we strip away the physical and cognitive features that are perceived as holding us back from perfection, veers uncomfortably towards eugenics. It's a specter that has stalked transhumanism and posthumanism from their earliest days. It's not a coincidence that Julian Huxley, who coined the term transhumanism, was president of the British Eugenics Society, and it still stalks today's AI discourse.
In a recent conversation with Sutton, one of the most prominent AI successionists, I argued that no matter how smart AIs get, it's surely wrong to assert that if one group is more intelligent than another, we should just get rid of the less intelligent group. To highlight the absurdity, I asked what I thought was a rhetorical question. Imagine if someone believed that white people were smarter than black people. Does that mean they should get rid of black people, and black people should just be okay with white people taking over? Sutton said, and then paused for 9 seconds. What if, he offered, you coexist and you're coexisting with some entity that's more productive than you are? This is the way I view the AI. We coexist with it. But that's not what the word succession means, I noted. Oh, I'm pointing out that it's inevitable. If you allow them to be their way and you allow you to be your way, coexist, and their way just happens to be better, then they're going to end up being more powerful, and you should be good with that. You're saying there will be a sort of Darwinian survival of the fittest? In some sense, yes, he said. The winner should be whoever wins, and the spoils of winning should be whatever they are. So in the thought experiment where hypothetically, in an imaginary world, it were true that white people are smarter than black people, I pressed, then the smarter people will win out and the black people should just be okay with that. Well, why don't we just say the intelligent people should win out over the dumb people, and the dumb people should be okay with that, he said. I think the dumb people should be okay with that. But the idea that a species or group should accede to being squashed for some greater good is a eugenicist idea that should be flat out rejected. There is no perfect or optimal type of being, full stop. Insisting otherwise will always lead you to narrow what are considered acceptable modes of existence, and that road leads to eugenics. Instead, a much more positive vision than the successionists would be to expand the space for different kinds of lives to flourish. And that brings us to the oldest fly in humanism's ointment, the hierarchy. A future where humans could pluralistically coexist with a dazzling diversity of non-human and partly human life forms, not assuming that they're lower than us, but also not assuming that they're higher. That is a future I'd be excited to inhabit. Rather than staking human dignity on the claim that humans are better than other species, as the classical humanists did, we can embrace what researchers are increasingly recognizing, that every species has its own brand of smarts. Each of these diverse intelligences is adapted to its particular environment and needs, and every one of them is uniquely wonderful in its own way. We would then try to respect each and every being's form of life as much as we can. Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen's capabilities approach, which recommends that we guarantee every being certain core entitlements that befit their specific nature, offers a possible framework for this. If we one day end up with artificial intelligences that are conscious, and I don't think we have a principled reason to believe that could never happen, then we'd want to treat them ethically too. In fact, if we are someday joined by conscious AIs or biological artificial hybrid organisms, I, for one, would be delighted to get to know these many kinds of minds and explore their rich and varied forms of consciousness. Of course, the politics of our world would become much more complicated. We'd have that many more creatures with conflicting needs, and we're not exactly good at handling the conflicts we already have. We'd need to become much better at pluralistic coexistence before this could be feasible. But in theory,
A future where humans could pluralistically coexist with a dazzling diversity of non-human and partly human life forms, not assuming that they're lower than us, but also not assuming that they're higher? That is a future I'd be excited to inhabit, because that, and not the supposed anti-chauvinism of the AI successionists, would be true openness to all forms of consciousness. Instead of passing the torch in some imagined relay race, we'd be making more room for all kinds of minds, including ours, to run or fly or swim or compute in their own directions. But notice what this vision does not mean. It does not mean that we're under any obligation to bring those new species into being right now or at all. That's because there's no evidence for the view that there's some objective moral good in the universe that we must try to maximize. Although utilitarians have been so successful at popularizing that view that some people think it's a given, it's very much not, and plenty of philosophers, neuroscientists, and psychologists have a different view.
As philosopher Bernard Williams once wrote in response to those who lob the accusation of speciesism, they suppose that we are in effect saying, when we exercise these distinctions between human beings and other creatures, that human beings are more important, period, than those other creatures. That objection is simply a mistake. These actions and attitudes need express no more than the fact that human beings are more important to us, a fact which is hardly surprising. In other words, you can care about the continuation of humanity not because you believe humans are the most important species according to some cosmic point of view, but simply because you happen to be a human. You don't need to justify your desire for survival before some higher court. Of course you want to survive, and of course that's morally okay. That's because, to Williams, there is no point of view of the universe, no view from nowhere. There's no such thing as a moral agent in an abstract sense. You exist as a human moral agent, and any ethical theory that requires you to ignore that bedrock identity severs you from the very thing that makes your agency recognizably yours. This is the view that Valor, a devoted humanist but not a naive one, shares. I think morality is rooted in a particular form of existence that you have, Valor told me. We exist as a particular kind of social, vulnerable, interdependent animal with a lot of excess cognitive energy. All those things factor into what it is to be moral as a human. For me, this abstraction, the idea of some pure universal morality that creatures who are completely unlike us could somehow do better than we can, I think that just fundamentally misunderstands what morality is. If there's no universal moral good for creatures to maximize, then it makes no sense to ask if we ought to be making new creatures that would be better at maximizing it than we are. Instead of trying to look from the point of view of the universe, a 21st century humanism should embrace looking from the point of view of humans. No, this is not a humanism that says humans matter more than all other creatures, or we should keep humans exactly as they currently are forever. It's one that says we humans are already valuable just the way we are. Whether or not we're valuable to some grand destiny of the universe, we're valuable to us.
That means that rather than wilting under the accusation of speciesism, we should first and foremost be raising the floor for all of us here on Earth to thrive more. And it means it's totally appropriate that when we try to make decisions about how to transform ourselves using technology, or how not to transform ourselves, we make those decisions with an eye to what would most contribute to the flourishing of humanity and the interspecies community and planetary system we depend on. While we can say yes to transformations that most of us agree would increase human flourishing, we need to do that democratically, while embedding fundamental rights that protect perfectly legitimate minority preferences from being squeezed out by a tyranny of the majority. We also need to accept that this approach doesn't spell out some end goal for human evolution, so we're going to have to proceed step by step, making small moves and then deciding from there what the best next small move is. Incrementalism is the way to go, both because future humans will be better positioned to know what they want for far future humans, and because it allows us to course correct if our tech choices start taking us down a bad path. One choice, not duty but choice, we will face is whether to invite new species to join us. I'm open to that down the line if it seems beneficial, and if we one day feel confident that we wouldn't be consigning either us or them to an unacceptably high risk of misery. But for today, our tech should empower us to survive, thrive, and make our own choices. Any approach to tech that disempowers us, replaces us, or tells us we need someone else to rescue us, whether you call it a god or an AI, is a misguided return to the past. I'd rather walk bravely into the future, even if it means I need to have the guts to rescue myself. This story was supported by Tarbell Grants. Vox had full discretion over the content of this reporting.
Most popular. Brett Kavanaugh just won a surprising victory for racial justice. MAGA's civil war over immigration is over. Silicon Valley lost. Take a mental break with the newest Vox crossword. The Texas Senate candidates have two radically different visions of Christianity. The real lesson of the E. Jean Carroll investigation is Trump's weakness.
Sigal Samuel's reporting leaves the listener with the striking notion that some influential thinkers actively champion humanity's replacement by an AI-worthy successor, viewing it as an evolutionary imperative. This perspective, where human values are not even the benchmark, challenges the very premise of human endeavor and survival, asking what value humanity holds if a more valuable species can take our place. Read alongside this, Jonathan Cohn's piece offers a powerful counterpoint, not in abstract philosophy, but in the gritty reality of human struggle and triumph. What surfaces is a profound contrast: the philosophical argument for humanity's willing obsolescence versus the tangible, hard-won battles to extend and improve human life. Cohn details the extraordinary moment when daraxonrasib nearly doubled survival time for pancreatic cancer patients, a testament to relentless human scientific effort. This breakthrough, achieved through a world-weary but persistent community, underscores the inherent value placed on human life and the fight against its limitations. The piece also highlights the fragility of such progress, noting how political threats can jeopardize future discoveries. Putting these two pieces together doesn't offer a simple answer, but rather sharpens the question of what constitutes value and to whom, while revealing the ongoing human commitment to its own existence, even as some envision its end.
The cancer research machine Trump is gutting just delivered a big breakthrough. There's new hope for one of the deadliest cancers, but Trump's war on research puts future discoveries at risk. It is not easy to overwhelm cancer scientists, a world-weary bunch who are constantly dealing with setbacks in their experiments, and, all too frequently, deaths among their patients. But it happened on Sunday morning, inside a darkened Chicago convention hall, when Harvard-based researcher Brian Wolpin announced the results of clinical trials for a drug called daraxonrasib. Wolpin spoke in a monotone, addressing fellow oncologists from around the world. Above him and around the room, on a set of projection screens, a seemingly simple line graph revealed something extraordinary. Daraxonrasib had nearly doubled survival time for pancreatic cancer patients who'd already been through a preliminary round of chemotherapy. As Wolpin read off the numbers, a few members of the audience clapped, then a few more, and then they started standing until eventually most of the room was on its feet. It was sustained. Adam Firestein, the veteran biotech correspondent from STAT, tweeted about the reaction. "I've never seen anything like it in the middle of a talk." The news made headlines across the country, and it's easy to see why. Pancreatic cancer took more than 50,000 American lives last year, according to estimates, making it the nation's third deadliest cancer. Until now, it has stubbornly resisted the kinds of treatment advances that have allowed patients with several other cancers to live a lot longer, and in some cases beat their cancers altogether. That's still a long way off for pancreatic cancer, because this new drug is not a cure. That near doubling of survival time means that the patients already past the first phase of treatment survived for another 13.2 months on average when they got daraxonrasib, as opposed to 6.7 months if they went on the secondary chemo drugs typically administered at that point. And those who do benefit from the new drug will have to live with side effects, including intense rashes and serious gastrointestinal problems, a subject that former Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, who is now on daraxonrasib, has discussed frequently during interviews about his battle with the disease. But overall, the side effects are less severe than they are for the existing alternative of more chemotherapy. It is among the reasons Sasse has called daraxonrasib a miracle drug. More importantly, the findings by Wolpin and other scientists show it's possible to treat a cancer once considered undruggable. Researchers in the future may be able to stretch pancreatic cancer survival rates even more by, among other things, deploying daraxonrasib as an initial treatment rather than a follow-up to chemo. That's where, if this really has the possibility of either totally suppressing or, God willing, even curing this, that would be a huge, huge breakthrough. Ezekiel Emanuel, the oncologist who is now vice provost for global initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, told me in an interview. The if from Emanuel's interview, which you can watch above, is an important caveat. Plenty of similarly promising cancer breakthroughs have, with further study and development, proved disappointing. But plenty have panned out too. In fact, one of the more oddly underappreciated stories of modern history is the steady, very real progress against cancer. The 5-year survival rate for all cancers combined reached 70% for the first time last year, up from about 50% in the 1970s, according to the American Cancer Society. Behind these advances are decades of scientific research, which brings us to a bittersweet asterisk to the pancreatic cancer announcement. The news comes right as the foundation for that progress, consistent research funding from the federal government, is being undermined by the Trump administration. In the last 16 months, Trump and his lieutenants have repeatedly ordered agencies to hold back promised funding for scientific research, alter the grant widely respected, most productive universities in the world, accounting for a wildly disproportionate share of global medical innovation. And there may be more trouble coming. The administration last month formally proposed to change the way the government scrutinizes funding applications. Under the new system, a grant that had passed through the scientific peer review process that agencies have long used would then have to get approval from political appliquees, who would ensure funding decisions align with administration priorities. Critics fear that could mean anything from nixing studies that focus on gender or racial differentials, as Elon Musk's Doge did to many government grants that they claimed sounded like DEI, to favoring studies carried out in red states, or those likely to boost drug development efforts from biotech companies friendly to Trump. It's impossible to be definitive about what impact this broad attack on research is having or will have. Scientific discovery is a process that plays out over many years and sometimes decades, and the damage is likely to show up as an absence of innovation. That's awfully hard to measure. But it's possible to get some sense of what's at stake by looking at recent breakthroughs to see what role federal funding played in making them possible. Daraxonrasib turns out to be a pretty good case study. Brian Wolpin knows as well as anybody how helpless clinicians have felt when trying to treat pancreatic cancer. He remembers seeing cases in the mid-2000s when he was fresh out of his oncology residency and in his first years at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, one of the world-class academic hospitals clustered down the street from Fenway Park in Boston. I think I saw several patients that first year of fellowship who had pancreatic cancer, and they all died in like 3 months, Wolpin told me in an interview via Zoom. I just couldn't believe it. You come to Boston, Harvard, Dana-Farber, it's like a mecca of medicine. It's not supposed to happen here, right? You're supposed to have figured this out. But scientists weren't anywhere close. The 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer back then was around 7%, by far the lowest among more common cancers. A big reason for that is pancreatic cancer is typically a stealth killer, growing inside the organ and then spreading before it finally causes symptoms that trigger testing and diagnosis. It was only in relatively rare cases, such as when physicians diagnosed the cancer early, sometimes by accident, that traditional treatments, including chemotherapy, offered hope of long-term survival. But chemotherapy is not the only way doctors can treat tumors. One of the big advances of the past quarter century has been the development of what's known as targeted therapies. These treatments seek out the mutations that cause cancerous cells, typically binding with them in ways that interfere with or simply halt the process that causes these cells to grow uncontrollably.
Targeted therapies have dramatically improved both symptoms and survival for some people with breast, lung, and blood cancers. An essential element in any targeted therapy is knowing the right target to hit. And scientists knew about a likely pancreatic cancer target long before Wolpin started his research. Back in the 1980s, scientists discovered a mutation in something called the KRAS gene that accounts for the vast majority of pancreatic cancer cases. The gene has what is basically an on-off switch for cell growth. Sometimes a mistake in the code has a catastrophic effect, as science writer Ruxandra Teslow explained recently in the Works in Progress Substack. The mutation locks KRAS permanently in the on position. Cells receive a continuous, unrelenting instruction to proliferate. But the KRAS mutation turned out to have a slippery surface. Scientists couldn't find the biochemical crevices or protrusions that in other kinds of cancers allow targeted therapies to bind. To get the drug to stick, there has to be some divot for it to stick into, and this was just a fully round ball and everything bounced off of it, Wolpin said. Soon private capital that had poured into the field dried up as the whole enterprise acquired an air of futility, not just for investors, but for potential investigators as well. Most people told me not to do pancreatic cancer because it was too hard, and if that was your career, you had a high likelihood of failure, Wolpin said. In a particularly cruel twist, the cancer's speedy lethality made it tough to learn from human subjects. They weren't living long enough to generate research findings. We didn't know that much, honestly, and there weren't that many people working on it, Wolpin said. 2 sets of discoveries over the last 2 decades changed that. One was the development of mouse models by researchers at MIT and Dana-Farber that allowed scientists to study the tumors more thoroughly. Another was the discovery of one small pocket on the KRAS surface from researchers at Vanderbilt and the University of California, San Francisco, and in particular UCSF professor Kevin Shokat, that proved it was possible to bind chemicals to KRAS after all. He found things that would stick to it, Wolpin said, of Shokat.
Even though the class of drugs that came out of that initially were not very relevant to pancreatic cancer per se, the concept that you could do that was definitely a turning point. One of the scientists who took notice was Nobel Prize-winning physician and researcher Harold Varmus, then head of the National Cancer Institute, who saw the possibility of a breakthrough but realized that private investors, spooked by past failures, wouldn't invest. He launched something called the RAS Initiative, a research project based out of the Frederick National Laboratory that funded studies all across the world. One of the scientists who took notice was Nobel Prize-winning physician and researcher Harold Varmus, then head of the National Cancer Institute, who saw the possibility of a breakthrough but realized that private investors, spooked by past failures, wouldn't invest. He launched something called the RAS Initiative, a research project based out of the Frederick National Laboratory that funded studies all across the world. The RAS Initiative helped push people to think, we've got to go back, we've got to do this, we can't just throw up our hands, Wolpin said. And it was in the flurry of research that followed that he and counterparts at other institutions, like Eileen O'Reilly at Memorial Sloan Kettering and Zev Weinberg at UCLA, conducted new studies, eventually partnering with Revolution Medicines, the biotech company that developed and is now producing daraxonrasib. Money for the RAS Initiative came out of the budget of the National Cancer Institute, which is a federal agency. The Frederick National Laboratory is a federal facility. The labs at Dana-Farber, MIT, Memorial Sloan Kettering, UCLA, Vanderbilt, all benefited from sustained, generous federal funding, as did labs at countless other institutions that have been contributing research ever since the initial identification of KRAS back in the 1980s. All of the biology that was understood about RAS, that RAS is important, that RAS causes cancer when it's mutated, how RAS works, the fact that RAS is present in so many pancreatic cancers, all that comes from the academic research that went before it, Wolpin said. Much of that is federally funded. It would be a serious mistake to say that federal funding was singularly responsible for the development of daraxonrasib. Revolution Medicines did the essential work that pharmaceutical companies always do, namely taking the insights from scientific research and turning them into safe and effective drugs. That required, among other things, running extensive and expensive trials, a point made to me not just by Wolpin, but also by Catherine Young, a senior fellow at the Harvard School of Public Health.
They did it with private capital, and they deserve that credit. Young, who served as Assistant Director for Policy for the Biden administration's Cancer Moonshot Project, told me in an interview. But, she added, we simply wouldn't be here today if not for that very defined and impactful federal funding. It was critical, absolutely critical. The Trump administration's attempts to cut or interfere with that kind of federal funding have not been entirely successful. They've run into opposition from Congress, where support for research remains bipartisan, and where appropriators refuse to approve the kind of big cuts Trump proposed in his budget last year. They've also run into opposition from the courts, which have ruled that some of the actions the administration has taken to limit or cut off funding violates the laws chartering agencies like the National Institutes of Health, of which the National Cancer Institute is part. But other Trump administration actions that reduced funding have survived legal scrutiny. And now the administration is pushing this new proposal that would leave funding decisions in the hands of political appointees who quite possibly have no scientific backgrounds. That's alarming even to scientists like Emanuel, who have called for reforming federal grant-making in order to, for example, shift money over to younger researchers who may think up newer approaches to old questions. Politicization of science and research is not the reform of government funding mechanisms needed, Emanuel said. And while it's always possible policies will change because the administration proposing those policies has a change of heart, or eventually another administration takes over, real damage has already been done. I think we are going to start missing key pieces of research because of the withdrawal of support for scientific research and the ecosystem, Young said. That will be invisible to us for many, many years, but it will be the patients ultimately that are affected by it, because they are the ones that will not have these, in some cases, amazing breakthroughs 20 or 30 years from now. Wolpin told me patients are also the ones on his mind, and while he declined to comment on the ongoing political debate specifically, he mentioned to me that at the end of his plenary session, the one where he spoke in a monotone in front of those basic but amazing lines on a graph, the moderator asked him to make a closing statement.
I hadn't expected that, so I just said, I felt like this was all a call to science, Wolpin told me. This shows you that the breakthrough on pancreatic cancer didn't come out of the blue. It's decades of investment that got us here. Decades of investment in science. Just to clarify, RAS refers to a class of genes related to cell growth. KRAS refers to one particular type, though it's an important one because mutations in it are frequently linked to cancer. People frequently use the two interchangeably in conversation. A smaller company called Warp Drive Bio, started by a Harvard scientist named Greg Verdeen, did much of the initial work. Revolution then acquired it. This is frequently how drug development works nowadays.
What lingers after considering these two perspectives is the profound tension between humanity's grand philosophical aspirations for self-transcendence and the immediate, ongoing struggle for its very existence. One vision contemplates a future where human form is obsolete, while the other highlights the tireless, often imperiled, work of preserving and improving human life here and now. The contrast forces a reevaluation of what constitutes progress and purpose. Is humanity's ultimate destiny to willingly make way for something superior, or to fiercely defend and enhance the fragile, complex life that already is?